Hello and welcome to Modern Horizons 3's top 15 cards to make for Brawl. I am Grimsign,
And I'm Hazor.
and we decided that we're gonna make this list so that you can figure out what you want to make for your next decks.
On this list we have a ton of powerful cards because this is a Horizon set, meaning that all of the cards printed in the set are skipping Standard and going straight to Modern. So that's why this is a top 15, in that we can't even get all of the good cards on this set onto this list. We just have what we think are the best ones. And I think,
Any?
sorry?
Uh, no, you could go.
Okay, I was gonna get us carried on to our honorable mention, which isn't really the honorable mention as we usually have it this time.
And that is the Evoke Elementals. Now you might be thinking, honorable mention. Those cards are powerful. They have seen play. Fury is banned. Why would you put them as honorable? And we understand. But at the same time, the special guest list is all mythics. They are all uh in that slot and would take up most of the list entirely if we were to just use them. So in consideration, we decided to just put them as an honorable mention and then mention other cards that we think really stand out in comparison.
Yeah, as Grimson said, the special guest list is pretty good, and between the 5 Evoke Elementals, all of which are good to varying power levels, and particularly, as mentioned, Fury. But in addition, Dismember and Persist are also widely played cards. We really didn't want to make the entire top 15 the special guest list, so we just slotted it all into the honorable mention slot. It's nowhere to the bottom of the power level, though.
Indeed, indeed.
Good luck having Mythic wildcards after the set release.
So, would you like to start us off though with our number 15?
Yeah, at number 15 we have Volatile Storm Drake. It is 1 blue for a 3/2 creature. It's a Drake with flying, and hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. When Volatile Storm Drake enters the battlefield, exchange control of Volatile Storm Drake and target creature an opponent controls. If you do, you get 4 energy counters, then sacrifice that creature unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value. This is just a above rate body, but the real reason that you would play this card is to take your opponent's commander and then kind of just keep it so that they have to deal with it later.
Honestly, there's a lot to it type situation. You can take the commanders to disrupt them, but you can also use it to just remove a commander from the presence. So, for example, if say you have an Atrax on the board and you have lethal, but you can't, but the Atraxa stops you from getting lethal, you can just play the Drake, swap the two, and then just sacrifice the Atraxa to make the field open up for smashing.
Yeah,
Overall, I think the card is definitely going to see a lot of play, but we put it so high on the list because it's a very situational card in comparison to other things out here.
yeah, I agree. It's definitely very situational in that I think you don't play this in control at all, because giving your opponents a 3/2 flyer is definitely a relevant body that you would still have to deal with as a control deck. The place where this will really shine is a kind of tempo deck in which you will be able to play that 3/2 flying body even if your opponent has no creatures, just because it's a 3/2 flying body for 2. That's a good deal, and you can just disrupt your opponent's game plan with it, in which case you're getting good value as a tempo deck.
Alrighty, moving on to our list, we got number 14, Arena of Glory. It enters tapped unless you control a mountain, can tap for red mana, and if you pay a red mana, tap it and exert it, you get 2 red mana. If that mana is spent on the creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. Exerting a card makes it so that it can't untap during the next untap step. Basically, a lot of people might be thinking, hey, this doesn't even net you value in mana type situation, all that. Why would you want this over other cards? And to which I say, well, it is true you don't want to use it as for a value thing. The beauty of this card is how you can split the mana overall. You can use, say, for example, you use it to make 2 red mana. Well, you can use that to just cast 2 different 1-drop creatures, giving them both haste and go in. It's a very aggressive card that you will use early on for the aggro, but in comparison, you probably would want to use it its exert effect much less in comparison to other cards like it.
Yeah, so, and it's always going to come in untapped in a mono red deck, or even a Gruul deck usually will be able to enable this, which is where I would think of playing it. Yeah, as Granton said, it does exert, in which case you'll lose a mana on the next turn, so really you'll only be using this ability when you're hitting in for a ton of damage to make sure the game is ending. But the thing is, if you have, let's say, 5 mana on the board and you play this, you can not just give two 1-drops haste, you can give a 3-drop and a 2-drop haste, for example. And that is a lot of damage that you're aiming at your opponents. Also, and as I mentioned, Gruul, green creatures may not normally have haste, but they may be big bodies. This will just help accelerate any kind of stompy plan as well.
Indeed.
Next on our list, we have Hope Ender Quaddle. I don't know if that's how that's pronounced. It is 2 and a
Cool.
blue for a 2/2 creature Eldrazi Snake with Devoid, which means the card has no color, and Flash. When you cast the spell, counter target spell an opponent controls unless they pay 1, and it has flying. I personally really like this card, not just for any kind of Flash deck, but for any blue deck, maybe not every blue deck, but it is just a 2-for-1. A 2/2 flying is a very relevant body, and the counter spell is notably a cast trigger. So for your opponent to get rid of the countering part, they have to have a counter ability spell and not a counter spell.
And a lot of people will also think about a spell queller as a reference to this card type situation. They both work well in general, and spell queller does see a lot of play in Azorius style decks, especially things like Teferi or Saint Geist. But in general, I think that it's going to be easily slottable. It takes up maybe at worst a Gerari Dispute if you really are looking for something solo, and gives control players a way to just end the game through life loss
Yep.
by just swinging in the air with a great evader.
And notably, unlike the aforementioned spell queller, does not give your opponent back the spell.
Indeed. Moving on to our list, we are around number 12 with Sithonian Nightmare. 1 in a black enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy, and you can pay X energy to sacrifice a creature to return it to your hand, and then return a creature with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. This is honestly one of the most powerful of those energy reserve list style effects, if you ask me. Mostly because of the fact that it's able to just get so much value. You are not losing out on it. And at the end of the day, you could just use it to sacrifice, bring back a 1-drop creature to then net more and more energy as you do it. Compared to the other ones where you're probably never going to cast them again in Brawl, Sithonian Nightmare just makes enough presence to to be able to be cast multiple times.
Yeah, now that I read this card, I probably should have had it higher on the list. I've heard that it's similar to Recurring Nightmare, but I've never played with Recurring Nightmare, so I don't really know how to evaluate it that well. But reading this card, basically, you're going to be able for 2 mana to get anything with mana value 3 or less out of your graveyard by sacrificing a creature, and then you can keep doing that for 2 mana basically repeatedly. And if you don't spend all that energy, you can get a 6-drop later, and who knows. But I guess the really important thing, I'm thinking mostly Slimefoot and Squee for this. If you can just keep getting Slimefoot and Squee back from your graveyard like this, and it will keep making Saprolings. And then you can sacrifice Slimefoot repeatedly and still get a Saproling every time. So I think that's probably the best deck for this.
Indeed.
Alright, at the number 11? Yeah, 11 spot, we have Strix Serenade. It is a 1 blue instant with counter target artifact, creature, or planeswalker spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 bird creature token with flying. This is the Swan Song, but for your opponent's commander spell. Uh, it's going to be played, and anywhere where you would play Swan Song is where you would play this. The only thing I really need to say, I think, is that not every deck wants to play a Swan Song type thing, just because for control decks, for example, you still have to deal with a 2/2 bird token. That's not an irrelevant body.
In general, I think that card to compare it to is Wash Away in with that situation because you're gonna be it's a 1 mana drop that can guarantee hit any of the commander's staff. The only thing is with Wash Away, it was designed to have its downside be its cost in general, which is then opposite in Brawl, whereas Strict Serenade's downside is something you should still take note of in Brawl. Because sometimes a person can just counter your turn one Ragavan and still die to the bird that they gave you, which
Yeah,
is going to be a lot of situations where people just don't think about the counter spells they use.
yeah, for sure.
Wow, we're talking more negatives about this card than positives.
Well, yeah, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's mostly just a message that you don't want to play it in every deck, but it's
Yeah,
such a simple design that there's really not much to say about it besides that it's really efficient at what
yeah,
it does, and if you want to
indeed.
do that, then do it.
Well, speaking of cards that have simple designs, here's one that doesn't. Number 10, Cozy Lek, this broken reality. At 9 mana, legendary creature Eldrazi. When you cast this spell, up to 2 target players each manifest 2 cards from their hand. For each card manifested this way, you draw a card. Manifesting basically is like morph, except they don't have a morph cost, and you have to pay the mana to flip them. Other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. Now, in general, a lot of people might be thinking of this as just you just replace 2 cards in your hand to draw 2. But in general, there's so much to this. Say you don't have any cards in your hand, but your opponent seems to be a control player. Casting this card allows you to take 2 of their big spells, chances are, in their hand, and it gives you 2 and allows you to get 2 cards into yours. If you were to say have a way to cast it without paying its mana cost, like say with Omniscience, you could easily change your hand overall comparatively, while also giving your opponent downside, and then drawing 4 cards. And no matter what, as long as Kozilek remains on the field, your face down cards are going to be much better than whatever face down cards they have.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description of it. I just love this card. So for 9 mana for a 9/9 is it's that would be bad on its own, I guess. But 9 mana for a 9/9, where when you cast it, your opponent pretty much discards 2 cards, and then you draw 4 cards after you discard 2 cards, is effect. I don't know how many for one that is. That's at least 3 for 1 right there, because it's also antheming your manifests into 5/4s. Well, there's still 2/2s, as Grimson said, against a control player, they can't. You can only manifest and flip creature cards. So if they manifest an instant or something, that's just a 2/2, and they can't do anything else with it. And in addition, it's also a cast trigger. So again, even if they do counter a Kozilek, you will still be able to get your opponent to discard 2, and you can still loot 2 in the same way. Uh,
I definitely will think we'll see more play of this card overall than in mono green decks.
Yeah, for sure. It's a ramp payoff. The only reason it's so far down is because when you play this card, you might not be able to manifest 2 from your hand every time. But either way, it's still very strong.
Indeed.
All right. Moving on, in the number 9 spot, we have Barbarian Ring. It's a land with tap, add red. Barbarian Ring deals 1 damage to you. And Threshold, red tap, sacrifice Barbarian Ring. It deals 2 damage to any target. Activate only if 7 or more cards are in your graveyard. I just like this card as for any red aggro deck, including Boros color aggro decks and things like that, in that any deck at this point can fill up their graveyard pretty easily with fetch lands and such, and once you have that requirement, your land becomes a shock, and what aggro deck doesn't want that?
Basically, in my opinion, I do think it's a bit high personally. But in general, it's just Ramanap Ruins, a style effect. And we already see Ramanap Ruins see a lot of play just for that 2 damage in mono red decks. And this is just Ruins but the cost is much less. And it does it to 2 damage to any target, which can make a big difference. Say, like with killing a blocker, taking out a planeswalker at it, and due to the fact that it's all at instant speed levels, you actually can be able to do it at during opponent's end steps to take care of anything they brought out.
Yeah.
Overall,
Uh, Those
I
are
think
all.
it's a lot better overall, also, finally, because it just enters untapped.
Mm, yeah, definitely. It's basically just a mountainside grid for all those aggro decks, and much better than aforementioned Ramen Ruins for everything that you said.
Alrighty. Moving on to our list, at number 8, we have Nadu, Winged Wisdom. Yes, he is a 1 in blue and a green. It's a 3/4 legendary creature bird wizard with flying, and creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield, otherwise put it in your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn. A key thing to note about this card is the fact that it gives it so that each of the creatures say it only triggers twice each turn, not that he makes it that they trigger twice each turn. A lot of people might think you could only get two things, but if you had a zero drop equipment, Nadu, and one other creature on the board and just kept swapping the equipment between the two, you can get four triggers there. Add something like a Scoot Swarm or anything that can make a creature whenever you get your landfall triggers, and you're almost guaranteed to just go infinite there. Honestly, it's gonna be the most interesting Simic commander out there at the moment.
Yeah, it's going to be very strong also. This will definitely be played competitively. I know in Dual Commander this is already looking very strong, but they also have zero cost equipment, as in like zero cost to equip equipment in Dual Commander that we don't have in Historic Brawl. That basically just makes this card go infinite with Scoot Swarm, as mentioned. But even without zero cost equipment, this still is reliably letting you play a ton of lands from the top of your deck and just draw cards, just for having a board state and playing the game like a Submit Commander does.
I don't think there's much else to say about how good this card is.
Yep. So we will move on to number 7, where we have Marionette Apprentice. It is 1 and a black for a 1/2 Human Artificer with Fabricate 1, which means when this creature enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on it, or create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. And whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So we already have many kinds of Blood Artist and Zealpour Cutthroat and type effects on Arena for sacrifice decks, but if you don't care that much about the life gain from those, this card is better than both of them in that it makes a body that you can sacrifice when you play it.
Indeed, it can also be in worst case scenario a 2/3 person in general, so that you can have your blocker and for the very worst situation. I think that as a whole, we already see a lot of play with Blood Artist because it triggers from any creature's death, and this is just slightly weaker because it only triggers from your card's death. But in doing so, it gives you a body, which can make the difference between having lethal or not in aristocratic style deck. Ah, tongue twister.
Yeah, this card would be nowhere near as good as it is if it was not able to make a servo when it entered the battlefield. And sacrifice decks that you're going to play this in always care about having that extra token.
All right, moving on to number 6, we have Amped Raptor. 2/1 with first strike for 1 in a red dinosaur. That has first strike, as I said, and when it enters battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. Then, if you cast it from your hand, exile cards on the top of your library into exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by paying an amount of energy equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So basically, a lot of people might think that design-wise, this card is gonna whiff a lot more than it hits because a lot of people have 4/5 drop payoffs, and this would not work well with those. But in general, I think it's gonna be a lot more of a hitter because of aggro style decks like Regavan, Tajik, Anim, which are running a bunch of smaller hits and removal at low cost. Like in general, I think that it's gonna be able to just win some games because turn one you play something, turn two you cast a raptor, you get another 1 or 2 drop to play for free. You already have 3 things on board, which in general will just sometimes be aggressive enough to just win games.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the numbers are on this, like where you would want enough 1 and 2 drops to play this card versus when you wouldn't want to play this card. But pretty much, if you can consistently get a 1 or 2 drop off of this card, it's doing great. If you can't, it's kind of sad, and that it's only a 2/1 first strike for 2. That's not the worst thing ever, though, in that it's just a decent body at minimum. Its floor is okay, and its ceiling is very good. So you should just, if you are running a very low curve red deck, it's very strong. The one thing actually, Grimstein mentioned this when we were talking about this card before this video, is that you probably should not play this in Izzet decks. Because if your Izzet deck is running counterspells, this can hit your counterspells and then they won't do anything.
It is such a downside to such an interesting card.
For sure. Moving on to your very next aggressive body. The set loves aggro cards, apparently. We have Ocelot Pride. It is a 1 mana 1/1 cat with first strike and lifelink. Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, create a 1/1 cat creature token. Then, if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. This is kind of like the white Ragavan in that it can very easily snowball, and that you play this on one, you hit your opponent, now you have 2 bodies for 1 mana, and that's already very good. If you can keep gaining this in, that just creates even more bodies.
Honestly, there's a lot to this card that I think really is going to make a lot of impact. You mentioned just getting more bodies from it, but it also triggers whenever you make any type of token, not just that. So if you had a Mardu deck and you had an Omnixus make a token type situation, you have the cat swing in, you get another Omnixus token if you ascended. And if you had the other two minus their effects to give you a bunch of devils, you could have so the 2 devils on the Obnix list, the cap makes a thing, and then we also have the Obnixus token. That's another 5 tokens there,
Yeah,
which really can just end games.
I actually find it interesting you bring up Obnexless, because I just realized that Obnexless does, in fact, gain life if you have a devil, which will trigger this card. Besides aggressive white decks, life gain decks will play this. Oh, there's not really competitive life gain decks yet. If you are playing life gain, this should also slot in there, because this doesn't even need to get in to make tokens if you're playing life
It
gain.
works. It does work well with Jam Jansen, which is a very popular Mardu commander.
Yes. Does that gain life? I don't remember. Yeah.
It sacrifices a non-creature token to make 2 creature tokens, or sacrifice a creature token, artifact to make
That's right. Yeah, so I guess we have artifacts that gain life or can get this in, then yeah, this would be great there
yeah,
too.
it'll
Uh,
make a bunch of treasures.
yeah, I think the last thing with this card is that usually First Strike is not a super relevant ability, but in this case it is absolutely relevant for this card getting in. If you play this on 1, and then your opponent plays their 1-drop, the 1-drops in this format that are very good are all 2/1s for 1 pretty much. And not life, like First Strike gets in on 1 toughness every time. So this will
The
be getting in.
only the only 1 drop I think that is popular that isn't a 2/1 is Hopeful Initiate.
Yeah, that's yeah. So, yeah. There's very
And
few
even then,
creatures.
it's a type of style of deck you would probably run in like Adeline style anyway. So you're still getting more value out of it overall in comparison.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of value, we're going to be talking about at number 4, Fell the Profane, an instant for 2 black mana that destroys target creature or planeswalker at instant speed. But it can also be Fellmire. As it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped and taps for black mana. Now, aren't shocked about modular face cards returning in this sense. And while we do agree that most of them are kind of gambling with the tricks you play with them, Fellmire really is the style you want with them. They enter untapped if you need them to. They're easily removal in many cases, and honestly, I think that this is one of those rare cases where the modular face card can just outright replace a land, and you
Yeah,
wouldn't see a downside.
for sure. Unlike in Zendikar Rising when we last got the pay 3 life, if not it enters the battlefield tapped modular lands, Those cards were mythics and they were very high costed. There's Felmire, and the front side is part of a cycle of uncommon rarity removal spells that are, as far as I know, all playable. It's just that Felled Profane is the best one, and in that it just does kill anything unconditionally when you need it to. Yeah. You should probably be putting these and probably the other removal ones over a basic land, at least in 1 to 2 color decks. Uh,
Alrighty.
in our third spot, we have Galvanic Discharge. It is 1 red mana for an instant with choose target creature or planeswalker. You get 3 energy counters, then you may pay any amount of energy. Galvanic Discharge deals that much damage to that permanent. I'm kind of surprised that they decided to print bolts into modern. I'm joking, bolts already in modern, to my knowledge, and also this isn't bolts. But it does everything bolt does except hit face, and bolt is already the best red card in the format, I think. I don't think of anything else that's better, and getting a second copy of bolt in your deck is always good.
I think just for overall play styles, Galvanic Discharge, being able to just use the energy overall might not be seen as good because, situational, you're probably not going to be running an energy based deck. But overall, the fact that this is just a 1 mana deal 3 damage to a planeswalker at instant speed can make a huge difference. Compare that to, like, say, Torch the Tower, where you had to sacrifice a permanent to do the 3 damage. And even then, I'd argue that sometimes it's just worth it to do the 2 damage instead if you want to keep your resources up.
Yeah,
But
this is
here, you basically are just able to control what you want to do with it. And if you had a way to just recast it, you can still net mana there too. Well, energy, I should say.
Yeah, this is the second best red removal spell in the format. And then also, yeah, there is one card that maybe this will get energy from, and it's Amped Raptor. If you miss your Amped Raptor trigger or get a 1 drop, you might have 1 or 2 energy counters remaining with which to spend on this card.
And if we were speaking of, if we use the galvanic discharge first to take out a 1 power thing, you'll have an ability to hit 4 drops.
Yeah, so that's a neat little pairing between the two good cards. But I mean, you should run Galvanic Discharge even in non-aggressive decks. Every
You
red
should
deck,
always run galvanic discharge, but the raptor is a situational card as we see it.
for sure.
Speaking of cards that are situational, we're going to be talking about number 2, Johnny, Nikado Pariah, who flips into a Johnny, Nikado Avenger. Now, the front, it's a 1 and a white legendary creature, 1/2, Cat Warrior. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/1 white cat warrior creature token. Whenever one or more other cats you control die, you may exile a Johnny, then return him to the battlefield, transform under his owner's control. And his other side is, for as a planeswalker has +2, put a +1 counter on each cat you control. 0, create a 2/1 white cat warrior creature token. When you do, if you control a red permanent other than a Johnny, he deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to any target, and his ult at -4 is each opponent chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifice the rest. Now, right away, we have already, at its worst case, a 2 mana Boros commander that enters with a body to give 3 power turn 2, which alone is insane for net value. But then we get to the other side of it, where we can get a card that produces blockers, makes removal happen, and at the same time just swarms the board with barely any need to set up. And at worst, you probably just +2 when you just need the loyalty. Why wouldn't you want to run this card? It's such a good card.
Yeah, it's really funny that you mentioned it can be used as a commander, because for some reason I did not even think about this from the standpoint of using it as a commander. You should say it's a slam in every Boros aggro deck, but honestly, yeah, this could be one of the best, if not the best, Boros aggro commanders. Being 2 bodies for 2 mana that total up to a 3/3. And then when the cat token dies, you get a walker where I see really 2 pathless walker. Either you are just using the 0 over and over again to just create a full board of 2/1 cat warrior tokens, and as long as you have, I don't know, a Ragavan or any other red permanents, you're just burning every creature your opponent plays or their face. Either that, or you uptick it immediately, and then -4, and your opponent's board gets wiped. Either way, it does everything.
It's such a slept. Well, I guess it's not really a slept on card. It's a really sought out card, but it's insane both as a commander and the 99, which is something you rarely see nowadays. I argue.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. The only really downside here is that the other cats, like you have to have another cat die while Ajani is on the field to get it flipped. But the fact that it has a good floor, even if it doesn't flip, just helps the card a lot. And
I would
also,
say another downside would probably be that you're more likely to run Tajik over Johnny, mostly because Tajik is a better payoff.
yeah, it really depends what style of deck you're playing. It's also worth noting that Ocelot Pride, as mentioned before, is a cat. So turn 1 Ocelot Pride to turn 2 this, you have a board of cats that can't kill anything.
Cat tribal goes boom.
If you're building this as cat tribal, I guess have fun.
You're better off using Jetmer there.
Yeah, probably. All right. Oh,
Uh,
play this in Jetmir for sure. All right, moving on to the top spot, we give it to Toxic Deluge, a pretty famous card. It's 2 and a black for a sorcery with as an initial cost to cast the spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. This is the cheapest board wipe, to my knowledge, and cheapest unconditional board wipe in the format. At 3 mana, you get to kill anything you want as long as you have a somewhat decent life total. Uh, Another thing I love with this card is that, let's say you're playing Atraxa or something, and your Atraxa is on the field, and you're facing off against a board of smaller creatures, you can pay only 5 life or something, and all your opponent's creatures die, and your Atraxa is still on the board, which other board wipes don't do that.
Honestly, I'm very scared of Toxic Deluge as an aggro player. Uh, there's a deck I usually play against Judith, and it's the my board can usually outswarm the Judith before it can make impact. And but right here, Toxic Deluge is a mana cheaper than my commander, Tajik, and can just wipe out my entire board for as little as 2 life, which in general is gonna be very common to see. I honestly think that Toxic Deluge should have been a mythic imprinted because of how powerful an impact it makes. But at the same time, it's a very easy to get card, very useful, and honestly, compare that to Bond 2's Last Reckoning, which was the last 3-drop black card that would had a downside of saying your lands on it are untapped. And it's no wonder people are excited for something like this for their mono black decks.
Yeah, I'm not even just mono black decks, but like Rusco and Atraxa, they'll all, any kind of black control deck
Any
will
deck
play
that
this
runs
card.
mono black that doesn't run this card is just hurting themselves.
Probably. I don't know. Yawgmoth might outrun this because most of their creatures are 1, but also they don't care about their creatures
I'd
dying.
still,
You never know.
yeah. Jogmoth doesn't care about death. What? Oh no, my board is dead. Anyway, I reoccur it.
Yeah, yeah. It'll definitely see play in a lot of the black decks that you see out there.
And that is our list for Brawl.
Yes.
It's just our top 15.
Yep, this has been the top 15 for MH3 from the Brawl Hub. If you're not in our server already, we have an invite link, I believe, in the description. So come join us to participate in our Brawl League if you really want. We'll see you next
If
time.
you, indeed, peace.